The road had become Eli Turner's final battlefield, a stretch of cold asphalt where memories slept beneath the snow. Once a soldier, now a drifter, he roamed the winter with only his aging shepherd, Rex, and the hum of an old pickup to keep the silence away. But that night, as the storm closed in, Rex began to bark at something in the dark. Through the swirling snow, Eli saw a flickering sign hanging by one chain, its faded letters still whispering, "Hope Café." What waited inside would test his faith, his past, and the very meaning of miracles. We invite you to support us by subscribing to the channel. The wind over Willow Creek carried the sharp scent of snow and pine. On the lone road that cut through the mountains, a battered blue pickup rolled slowly beneath the bruised sky. Inside sat Eli Turner, a man built from equal parts muscle and exhaustion. In his mid-40s, with iron-gray stubble tracing a jaw once chiseled by discipline, Eli had the look of someone who'd seen too much sand and too little mercy. His eyes, pale and distant, carried the ghosts of Afghanistan, a desert that had burned the softness out of him. He wore a faded army jacket, its patches long torn off, but the weight of them still visible in his posture. Beside him lay Rex, a German shepherd, well past his prime. His fur, once deep black and gold, had grayed around the muzzle. One ear bent slightly, the scar of a mission long ago when he had saved Eli from shrapnel. Rex was quiet now, breathing slow, head resting on Eli's knee as the truck rumbled over potholes. The storm came fast, fat flakes of snow swirling in the headlights like ghostly moths. Eli muttered under his breath, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. "Looks like we're parking for the night, boy." He'd said that 100 times before, in 100 nameless places. He pulled the truck over beside an abandoned gas station, but even that looked too far gone. Roof caved in, pumps rusted into skeletons. He sighed, looked at Rex, and turned back onto the road. The gas needle was kissing empty when he saw it. A faint sign flickering in the storm, half buried in snow. It read, "Willow Creek Café, brewed with love since 1978. The words hung crooked beneath a sign swinging on one chain, windows shattered, paint peeled, and a single door flapped weakly in the wind. Eli parked close, engine ticking down to silence. He sat for a moment, listening to the soft hum of falling snow against the windshield. His reflection stared back a stranger with hollow cheeks and eyes that no longer looked for tomorrows. Rex whined, pressing his head forward, his cloudy eyes bright with curiosity. "All right, partner," Eli muttered. "Let's see what kind of ghosts we've got here." He pushed open the cafe door. It groaned in protest. Inside, the air smelled of dust and stale sugar. The counter was layered in grime. Chairs lay overturned, their chrome legs rusted. On one wall hung a faded photograph of a smiling couple, a man in a white apron, a woman in a floral dress, holding a coffee pot. Her nameplate read, Marla. She looked kind, mid-30s, round face framed by curls, the sort of woman who could make even loneliness feel welcome. The man beside her, Henry, had a grin that could sell warmth to winter. Eli stood there, staring at them, wondering how long ago the laughter had stopped. He walked the narrow aisle, boots crunching over broken glass. Every step echoed through the hollow cafe like footsteps in a church. Rex trotted beside him, nose twitching, tail swaying low. The dog stopped suddenly at the far end near the counter, scratching lightly at a wooden cabinet. "What is it, boy?" Eli knelt, brushed away dust, and found a small metal tin wedged between boards. He pried it open. Inside lay a bundle of faded receipts, letters and notes ink-blurred, edges curled by time. The first letter began simply, "Coffee's cold, but I'll warm it when you come home." Eli read it twice, the corner of his mouth twitching upward, the first almost smile in years. There were dozens more, little messages scrawled on napkins, order slips, even sugar packet wrappers. They weren't business notes. They were fragments of love, written by hands that had built this place together. He leaned back against the counter, Rex settling beside him, head on his boot. The cold pressed in through the broken windows, but for once, it didn't feel empty. The words on those scraps whispered something he'd forgotten, that love, once planted, could outlive time and ruin. His fingers traced the faded ink as if touching the ghosts themselves. He remembered a night years ago, in a tent lit by red emergency lamps, when a young soldier under his command had died whispering his fiancée's name. Eli had promised to write her, but never did. He'd stopped believing words could heal. Yet here, in this dead cafe, words written decades ago somehow reached across the silence to find him. The wind howled outside, shaking the door. Rex lifted his head, alert. Eli closed the tin and whispered, "You feel that too, boy?" The dog tilted his head, ears twitching. There was no one there, only the quiet hum of snow. Still, something in the air had shifted faint, like the aftertaste of kindness. He dragged an old booth cushion to the corner and laid out his sleeping bag. Rex circled twice before curling up against his side. The cafe's sign flickered outside, one light sputtering to life for a moment before dying again. Eli stared at that flicker through the cracked window, thinking of all the places he'd called home, none of them his. Maybe this ruin could be different. Maybe some places were meant to be found by the broken. He whispered, "We'll rest tonight, Rex. Tomorrow, maybe we start fixing things." The dog huffed softly, as if agreeing. Snow drifted through the cracks in the wall, catching the moonlight. The letters in the tin sat on the counter, silent witnesses to a man and a dog who had finally stopped running. Outside, the wind carried the sign's rusted chain against the pole, a lonely rhythm in the night like a heartbeat trying to remember its purpose. Morning arrived pale and brittle, sunlight leaking through cracked windows like a secret. The snow outside had stopped, leaving the world coated in silence. Eli Turner woke to the faint warmth of his breath, clouding the air. Rex curled tightly against his leg. For the first time in months, he hadn't woken to the hum of an engine or the sound of highway trucks roaring by. Just stillness and the faint promise of something waiting to be rebuilt. He sat up, rubbed his stiff neck, and looked around the abandoned cafe. It was still a wreck, but now, with daylight touching its scars, he saw not ruin, but potential. He found an old broom leaning against the wall, the handle warped, but still sturdy. As he swept the floor, dust rose in slow spirals, catching the light like ghosts dancing. "Guess we start with clean floors, huh?" he muttered to Rex, who yawned and stretched, his tail thumping the wood. Outside, the air was sharp, slicing against his lungs as he stepped onto the porch. The truck sat there half buried in snow, its metal glinting dull silver. He thought of driving away, of doing what he'd always done when things started to mean something, but something in him refused. Back inside, he opened the metal hatch of the old fireplace. It was choked with ash and rust, but not dead. After rummaging through the storeroom, he found a box of old newspapers and a half-used can of kerosene. It took 3 tries, 1 burned thumb, and a quiet curse before the flame caught. The fire sputtered, gasped, then bloomed orange. Warmth crept slowly into the room. Rex trotted close, curling at Eli's feet, eyes half closed in contentment. Watching the flames, Eli felt something loosen inside him, something that had been clenched since the war. The simple comfort of firelight that didn't mean destruction. Around midday, he heard a sound soft crunching outside. Instinct kicked in. He reached for the rusted crowbar he'd kept near the counter. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped in. A woman bundled in a red wool coat, snow in her hair. She froze at the sight of him, bearded, broad-shouldered, eyes sharp as glass, and then offered a cautious smile. "Didn't mean to startle you," she said. Her voice was steady, gentle but worn at the edges, the kind of voice that had spent years speaking kindly to strangers. "I'm Carol Whitman. I live down the road. Saw smoke coming from here. Didn't think anyone was crazy enough to stay in this place." Eli lowered the crowbar. "Guess I am." Carol laughed lightly. She was in her late 50s, tall and willowy, with streaks of silver in her chestnut hair. Her hands were red from the cold, her cheeks freckled and soft. Years working in the local grocery store had given her a calm patience, but her eyes carried grief, something old and quiet. Her husband, he later learned, had died in a logging accident 5 winters ago, and since then, she had developed a habit of checking on anyone who looked lonely. "You the new owner?" she asked, looking around the cafe's broken booths. "Not exactly. Just the new squatter," Eli replied with a crooked grin. She glanced at Rex, who sniffed her hand before accepting a gentle pat. "Well, you've got good company at least. He's a handsome boy." "Yeah," Eli said softly, scratching Rex's neck. "He's the reason I'm still around." Carol set down the small bag she'd been carrying. Inside were 2 cans of soup, a loaf of bread, and a thermos of coffee. "It's not much," she said, "but you look like you could use a meal that didn't come from a tin 20 years old." Eli hesitated but nodded, accepting her kindness. They sat near the fire, the cafe's shadows dancing around them. For a moment, they talked like old neighbors about the storm, about the town, about how Willow Creek had once been a logging hub before the sawmill closed. When she asked what brought him here, Eli paused. I was just driving," he said. "Didn't plan on stopping. Guess the road ran out before I did." Carol studied him for a long moment, her eyes softening. "Then maybe you were meant to stop." She stood, brushing off her coat. "If you need supplies, come by the store. Folks here don't bite." After she left, the cafe felt different, not as lonely. Eli looked at the half-empty cup she'd left behind and thought of how strange it was after years of running from people, one stranger's kindness could feel like an anchor. He turned his attention back to the fireplace. It had dimmed, so he added more wood, coaxing the flame back to life. That night, with Rex asleep beside him and the fire glowing steady, Eli dragged a stool to the counter. He found a piece of chalk and wiped the grime off the large blackboard behind the register. The surface was cracked, faded, but when he ran the chalk across it, the white dust left a clean streak. Slowly, he wrote the words, "Hope, Café, opening soon." He stood back and looked at the phrase. It was ridiculous. He had no power, no money, no plan. But as the snow whispered against the windows and the fire hummed low, the words looked almost believable. Rex lifted his head, blinking up at him. "Yeah," Eli said quietly. "I think this place just came back to life." Outside, the old sign creaked again in the wind, as if the cafe itself approved. By the end of the week, Willow Creek began to whisper about the old cafe that had come back to life. A man with a scar on his cheek and a shepherd at his side was fixing the place up, people said. Some thought he was a drifter. Others said he was a soldier trying to outrun his ghosts. Whatever the truth, curiosity carried them to the cafe's broken steps one by one. The first to come was Walter Briggs, the town's retired carpenter. Walter was in his 70s, his back slightly bent, his skin weathered like the cedar he worked with. A thick gray beard hid most of his face, but his eyes still burned bright, steady, and practical. He had worked on half the homes in Willow Creek before arthritis made his hands stiff. He arrived one afternoon with a truck full of discarded planks and a coffee thermos. "Heard someone's patching up the old place," he said, stepping inside. "Can't let you do it wrong." His tone was rough, but his kindness hid in the way he ran his hand. Across the counter, already measuring its shape in his head, Eli nodded in thanks. "I don't have much to pay you," Walter shrugged. "Didn't ask for money. Coffee'll do." For 2 days, the sound of hammering replaced silence. Walter cut and sanded, while Eli lifted and held. Rex sat by the door, watching with the solemn patience of an old soldier on guard. When Walter left, he said only, "Keep her warm. She deserves it." Next came Lydia Monroe, the florist. She was 30, petite, with hair the color of autumn leaves and a nervous energy that seemed to hum around her like bees. Her small flower shop sat near the bridge, where she arranged wildflowers and lavender for funerals and weddings alike. She had moved to Willow Creek after a divorce 2 years earlier, trading city noise for quiet soil. Lydia carried with her a basket full of dried lavender and rosemary, which she set gently on the counter. "For the smell," she said softly, eyes darting shyly to Eli's face. "Places remember scents, you know. Maybe this one wants to remember kindness." Eli smiled, unsure how to answer, but her words stuck in his mind long after she left. Later that week, a group of high school students arrived. There were 4 of them, awkward and eager, armed with paint rollers and mismatched jackets. The ringleader, Tommy Rivas, was 17, all limbs and confidence, with a streak of green paint already on his cheek. "We heard you're fixing this up," he said. "Coach said we needed volunteer hours. This counts, right?" Eli chuckled. "If your arms survive, sure." For hours they painted the walls pale cream, laughing too loud, leaving shoe prints everywhere. One of them, a quiet girl named Sierra, asked if she could draw something on the wall. "Something small," she said. When she finished, near the window above the booth, there was a simple outline of a steaming coffee cup with a heart rising from it. It looked childish, imperfect, and absolutely right. By sunset, the air was thick with the scent of lavender and paint. Eli stepped back to look at the cafe. The walls were no longer gray but warm, glowing with life again. He felt something shift in his chest, a mix of disbelief and gratitude he didn't quite know how to carry. That night, Carol stopped by again with 2 mugs and a pie she claimed was store-bought but clearly wasn't. She sat beside the fire as Eli told her about Walter, Lydia, and the kids. "People surprise you when you let them," she said, smiling. The firelight turned her silver hair to gold. Maybe they just needed someone to remind them this place was worth saving. After she left, Eli walked to the corner where he had hung the old photograph of Henry and Marla, the original owners of Willow Creek Café. Their smiles were faded, but still bright enough to fill the room. He wiped the dust from the glass, and beneath it placed a small wooden sign he'd carved earlier that day with Walter's leftover wood. The words were simple, built on love, kept by faith. He stood for a long time looking at it, the soft crackle of the fire wrapping around him and Rex, like a lullaby. The dog lifted his head, tail tapping the floor. "Yeah," Eli whispered, crouching beside him. "They'd like it, wouldn't they?" Rex licked his hand and rested his head back on his paws. Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet, steady, forgiving. The old cafe had found its pulse again, not through money or miracles, but through the hands of strangers who still believed in fixing what could be saved. When Eli finally turned off the lights, the smell of lavender lingered in the air, and the fire's last glow danced across the sign, reflecting faintly against the picture of 2 smiling souls who had built something worth remembering. By the time the first heavy snow arrived, Hope Cafe was no longer just a building, it was breathing again. The scent of roasted beans and burning firewood drifted through the air like a promise. The old bell above the door jingled weakly whenever someone entered, its sound small but full of life. Eli Turner stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled up, hands dusted with coffee grounds, while Rex dozed beside the fire, one ear twitching at every footstep. The first real customer came in the middle of a blizzard, a trucker named Cal Porter. He was a broad man in his early 50s, with a wind-chapped face and a thick brown beard iced with flakes of snow. His clothes smelled of diesel and cold steel, and his eyes carried the exhaustion of someone who'd spent more years on the road than at home. He pushed through the door and stomped the snow from his boots. "You open?" he asked, disbelief coloring his voice. Eli nodded. "Sort of." He poured coffee from a machine that groaned, like it hated its job. The liquid came out thin and steaming. Cal took a sip, grimaced, then smiled. "Not good," he said. "But damn, it's warm, warm the right way." They talked for half an hour about highways, frozen tires, and the loneliness of long nights. Before leaving, Cal pulled a 20 from his wallet and left it on the counter. "Keep the change," he said. "Places like this keep the world turning." When the door shut behind him, Eli felt a strange pride swell in his chest. One man, one cup, one reason to keep the lights on. Word spread, slowly at first, then faster. A week later, a local construction crew started stopping by 5 men in heavy coats, boots caked with slush, faces ruddy from the cold. The youngest among them, Danny Holt, couldn't have been more than 20. He had sandy hair, a shy grin, and an endless appetite for pancakes. He told Eli he'd grown up in Willow Creek and used to pass this cafe on his way to school. Never thought it'd open again, he said, brushing crumbs from his jacket. Kind of feels like a piece of home came back. Then came Miss June Abbott, the local school teacher. She was in her 60s, short and sturdy, her gray hair tied in a bun, glasses sliding down her nose. Every morning she brought her lesson plans and ordered the same thing, a cup of weak tea and a blueberry muffin. She always sat near the window, grading papers in silence. Yet each time a new customer entered, she'd glance up and smile, as if silently approving of the world's small miracles. On the coldest morning of January, Eli found an envelope taped to the door. The handwriting was neat but unfamiliar. Inside were 4 crisp $100 bills and a note written in blue ink, for those who need a warm seat and a full cup. From someone who once needed both. Eli stared at the note for a long time, then folded it carefully and placed it under the register. That evening, he told Carol about it while she wiped down tables. "Anonymous kindness," she said softly. "You don't see much of that anymore." He nodded. "Maybe it's catching." The next day, he made a chalk sign and hung it by the door. "Free Cup Friday. If you're cold, tired, or just need a place to sit, coffee's on us." At first, only a few people came: an old man with frostbitten fingers, a teenage boy who wouldn't meet anyone's eyes, a woman carrying a baby wrapped in a scarf. Eli served them all, no questions asked. Rex stayed close, wagging his tail, sensing which ones needed comfort the most. The warmth spread, not just from the fire, but from the quiet understanding that no one had to explain why they were there. Soon, Hope Café became more than a stop, it became a shelter. When the blizzards rolled in, travelers stranded on the highway found their way to its door. The fireplace burned late into the night, and every mug of coffee felt like a small act of rebellion against the cold. Eli sometimes caught himself standing at the counter, just listening the soft murmur of conversation, the clink of cups, the sound of Rex's breathing. For the first time since the war, he felt part of something larger than himself. One night, as the snow fell so thick it muffled the world, Eli sat by the fire, Rex's head resting on his boot. The cafe glowed gold against the storm. He thought about the envelope, the faces that came and went, and the laughter that now filled the same space where once there had been only dust. He whispered to the empty air, "Guess we did all right, huh?" Rex lifted his head, gave a single wag of his tail, then settled again. Outside, the storm howled, but inside Hope Café, the world was warm, alive, and kind. Spring came quietly to Willow Creek, carrying the smell of thawing earth and rain-washed pine. The snow melted into rivulets that wound through the cobblestone streets, whispering life back into everything they touched. Inside Hope Café, the air smelled of coffee, varnish, and stories. The once faded walls now glowed with a patchwork of handwritten notes, thank you letters, sketches, and small mementos left behind by travelers. Eli Turner stood behind the counter, polishing a mug that had survived every winter since he first found the cafe. His beard was whiter now, and his hands trembled slightly when he reached for things, but his eyes still carried that same quiet fire, the look of a man who'd rebuilt, not just a place, but himself. Rex, though older and slower, still had the dignity of a soldier. His muzzle had turned almost completely silver, and his joints ached in the morning, yet he refused to stay home on cold days. He'd claim his usual spot by the fireplace, head resting on his paws, one ear tilted up as if listening for laughter that hadn't yet arrived. That morning, the bell above the door jingled softly. A woman stepped in, brushing raindrops from her shawl. She looked to be in her late 60s, tall but slightly stooped, her hair a gentle silver wave pinned neatly at the back. Her blue eyes were clear but wet at the corners, as though she'd walked a long way through both years and memory. She introduced herself quietly. "My name is Helen Matthews," she said. "Henry and Marla were my parents." Eli froze, mug in hand. He'd seen their faces every day in the old photo by the window, the same warm smiles that had once built this cafe out of love. Helen's resemblance to her mother was undeniable. The same gentle eyes, the same soft mouth that seemed on the verge of a smile even when she wasn't trying. He gestured to a booth. "Please sit down. You're welcome here." Helen smiled faintly. "I've been meaning to come for a while, but I wasn't sure I was ready to see it again." Her gaze traveled across the room, the patched floorboards, the mismatched chairs, the wall of thank you notes fluttering slightly in the draft. She laughed quietly, the sound delicate as porcelain. They would have loved this. Dad used to say the best coffee wasn't in the cup, but in the people who drank it. Eli nodded. "Your parents built something that refused to die. I just helped it find its heartbeat again." Helen reached into her satchel and pulled out an old photograph. The paper was worn soft at the edges, colors faded, but still warm. In it, Henry and Marla stood in front of the cafe, young, laughing, arms wrapped around each other. On the back, written in looping ink, were the words, "Love keeps the fire burning. Kindness lights the heart." She handed it to him with trembling fingers. "They took this on the cafe's opening day," she said. "Dad used to joke that the sign would outlive him. I think he was right." Eli studied the photo for a long moment. His chest tightened with something between sadness and gratitude. "Would you mind if I hang this next to their first picture?" "Only if you promise to keep laughing here," Helen said softly. That afternoon, the rain gave way to sunlight. Eli climbed a small stepladder and placed the photo beside the older one. The glass caught the light, and for a heartbeat, it looked as though Henry and Marla were standing right there, smiling at him through time. Beneath it, he hung a small wooden plaque he'd carved the night before. A simple phrase Rex had inspired while he sat by the fire: "Open every day, the heart is warm." Later that day, familiar faces began to drift in. Carol arrived first with a basket of fresh bread. Walter followed, his beard now as white as snow, still carrying his carpenter's pride. Lydia brought a bouquet of wild lavender, its scent mingling with coffee and spring air. Even Tommy Rivas, now older, wearing a mechanic's uniform, came in and teased Eli about the creaky stool that still wobbled the same way it had when he was a teenager. As the cafe filled with laughter and chatter, Helen sat quietly at her parents' old table, watching it all unfold. Rex trotted over to her, resting his head on her knee. She stroked his fur gently. "You've kept it all alive, haven't you?" she whispered. The old dog thumped his tail once, a soft, steady rhythm of agreement. By sunset, the cafe glowed golden, windows fogged with warmth. Eli stood near the counter, listening to the hum of voices, the sound of life, of belonging, of everything he thought he'd lost once upon a time. He caught Helen's gaze across the room, and she raised her cup slightly in a silent toast. He nodded back, smiling. Outside, the snow that lingered on the edges of Willow Creek finally began to melt. Water trickled from the cafe's eaves, glittering in. The late afternoon sun. Rex barked once, sharp and joyful, before curling up beside the door as the light spilled over the faded sign that still read, "Hope Café. Open every day. The heart is warm." Inside, laughter returned to the walls, and for the first time in years, the cafe remembered what it felt like to be alive. In the end, Hope Café wasn't just a story about a building or a man. It was a quiet reminder that miracles still walk among us, often disguised as kindness, patience, or a hand reaching out when the world feels cold. Sometimes, God doesn't send thunder or angels. Sometimes, He sends small moments of warmth, a cup of coffee, a stranger's smile, or the courage to keep going one more day. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Leave a comment, subscribe for more stories of grace, and may God bless you and those you love with light, comfort, and the gentle strength to believe again.